Admiral Cathvar of the Zephyrian Third Fleet had seen many things in his 40 cycles of military service. He had witnessed the brutal efficiency of Krillian war machines, observed the elegant death dances of Altarian fighters, and even survived an encounter with the legendary ghost ships of the Void Wraiths. But nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for what now appeared on his tactical display. The massive holographic projection flickered with energy signatures that defied conventional understanding. Ships, if they could even be called that, materialized from hyperspace with a violence that sent ripples through the fabric of spacetime itself. The electromagnetic pulse from their arrival alone had temporarily disabled 3 of his scout vessels. Sir, his communications officer, a young Trilaxian named Yixta, spoke with barely controlled panic in her voice. The energy readings they're off the scale. Our sensors are registering power outputs that should be impossible for vessels of those dimensions. Cathvar's 4 eyes narrowed as he studied the display. The ships that had emerged were unlike anything in the galactic database. Where most civilized vessels followed the elegant, curved designs that had dominated space warfare for millennia, these newcomers were brutal in their simplicity. Angular, aggressive, covered in what appeared to be armor plating thick enough to build space stations with. Identification, he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Unknown configuration, sir. No matches in any database across the known galaxy. But, sir. Yixta paused, her gill slits fluttering with nervousness. They're heading directly for the Hegemony Fleet. Cathvar felt his heart skip a beat. The Hegemony Fleet was the largest military force ever assembled in this sector, over 2,000 vessels representing 17 different species, all united under the banner of the Galactic Council. They had come to this remote system to establish a mining operation on the resource-rich planets orbiting the local star. It was meant to be a routine operation, barely worth the attention of such a massive force. But the Council had wanted to make a statement about unity and strength. Now it seemed that statement was about to be tested. How many ships? Cathvar asked, dreading the answer. 12, sir. Just 12 ships. The Admiral's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement if the situation weren't so dire. 12 ships approaching a fleet of over 2,000. Either these newcomers were completely insane, or they possessed capabilities that rendered numerical superiority meaningless. Open a channel to Fleet Command, he ordered. Priority Alpha. The holographic display shifted to show the imposing figure of Supreme Admiral Vorthake, the Draknari military commander who led the combined fleet. The reptilian leader's scarred features showed no emotion, but Cathvar had served with him long enough to recognize the tension in his posture. Admiral Cathvar, Vorthake's voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded fleets across a dozen star systems. I trust you're monitoring the new arrivals. Yes, sir. 12 vessels of unknown origin and configuration. They're maintaining course toward the main fleet at sublight speeds. Any response to our hails? Negative, sir. They appear to be ignoring all communication attempts across every frequency we've tried. Vorthake's tongue flicked out briefly, a sign of deep thought among his species. Very well. Take your fleet and intercept them. Standard first contact protocols. If they prove hostile, you have authorization to use whatever force is necessary. Cathvar acknowledged the order and began issuing commands to his fleet commanders. The Third Fleet consisted of 87 vessels, destroyers, cruisers, and his flagship, the Battleship Stellar Dawn. It was a force capable of pacifying entire systems, yet something about these unknown ships made him feel like he was taking a water balloon to fight a plasma cannon. As his fleet moved to intercept, Cathvar studied the tactical data streaming in from his scouts. The unknown vessels maintained perfect formation, too perfect. There was no drift, no minor course corrections that characterized living crews. Either these ships possessed auto-navigation systems of incredible sophistication, or their crews had a level of discipline that bordered on the mechanical. Sir, his tactical officer reported, we're receiving new data from long-range sensors. The energy signatures from those ships, they're not just powerful, they're unlike anything we've ever seen. The power plants appear to be fusion-based, but the efficiency ratings suggest technology far beyond anything in our databases. Fusion? Cathvar was puzzled. Most advanced civilizations had moved beyond fusion power centuries ago, progressing to antimatter or exotic energy sources. Yet these readings suggested fusion reactors of impossible efficiency and scale. Yes, sir. But, the output, it's as if they've somehow compressed stellar-level fusion reactions into ship-sized reactors. And, the weapon signatures. The tactical officer paused. Sir, I'm reading kinetic weapons. Projectile systems. Now Kethvar was truly confused. Kinetic weapons had been obsolete for millennia. Energy shields could deflect physical projectiles with ease, making such weapons useless except against the most primitive targets. Yet the energy readings suggested these kinetic systems were somehow the primary armament of the unknown vessels. Range, he asked. 60,000 kilometers and, closing. Standard engagement range for most civilized fleets was around 30,000 kilometers, where energy weapons maintained effectiveness while minimizing the risk of friendly fire. But, something told Kethvar that these unknowns wouldn't follow standard doctrine. All ships, reduce speed and assume defensive formation. Raise shields and charge weapons, but do not lock on targets. We're still operating under first contact protocols. The acknowledgements came back crisp and professional. Whatever else might be said about the various species of the Galactic Council, their military forces were well trained and disciplined. The Third Fleet moved into a complex defensive pattern that had been perfected over centuries of warfare. 40,000 kilometers, the tactical officer reported. Kethvar opened a general communication channel, broadcasting on every frequency known to galactic civilization. Unknown vessels, this is Admiral Kethvar of the Galactic Council Third Fleet. You are approaching restricted space under the authority of the Galactic Council. Identify yourselves and state your intentions. The response was immediate and completely unexpected. Galactic Council vessels, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Navy destroyer Relentless. You are trespassing in the Tau Ceti system, which is under the protection of the Human Colonial Authority. You have 60 seconds to reverse course and leave this system, or we will consider your presence an act of aggression. The bridge fell silent. In all his years of service, Kethvar had never heard of humans or Earth or anything called the Human Colonial Authority. Yet the voice that had responded was calm, professional, and carried an undertone of absolute confidence that sent chills through his exoskeleton. Sir, Yixto whispered, the translation matrix is having difficulty with their language. It's unlike anything in the Galactic Linguistic Database, but the universal translators are managing basic communication. 30,000 kilometers, Tactical reported. Kethvar made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Unknown vessel, Relentless, this system has been claimed by the Galactic Council for resource development. We have over 2,000 ships in this fleet. Surely we can reach some accommodation at 29,000 kilometers, the tactical officer interrupted. Sir, they're accelerating. All 12 ships are now moving at full sublight speed directly toward us. The human voice came back over the communication channel, and, this time there was something different in its tone. Something that made Kethvar's 4 hearts begin beating in alternating rhythms. Captain Chen to all human vessels. Weapons free. Show them what happens when someone threatens human colonies. What happened next would be dissected by military analysts for centuries to come. The 12 human ships didn't slow down as they approached the Third Fleet. Instead, they accelerated further, their fusion drives leaving trails of superheated plasma that registered on sensors as miniature stars. At 20,000 kilometers, still well outside standard engagement range, the human ships opened fire. But, these weren't energy weapons or guided missiles or any of the sophisticated armaments that dominated galactic warfare. These were chunks of metal, launched at velocities that approached significant fractions of light speed. The kinetic projectiles ripped through space with such speed that they appeared on sensors as barely perceptible blips before impact. The first salvo struck the destroyer Voidwalker. The ship's energy shields, designed to deflect or absorb energy attacks, did absolutely nothing to slow down solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. The tungsten rounds punched through the destroyer's armor as if it were tissue paper, the kinetic energy of impact releasing explosive force equivalent to antimatter weapons. Voidwalker simply ceased to exist. Evasive maneuvers. Kethvar shouted, but it was too late. The human ships had somehow calculated the trajectory and acceleration patterns of his entire fleet. More projectiles lanced through space, each one finding its target with mathematical precision. The cruiser Star's Edge tried to bring its main guns to bear, but another tungsten round struck its forward section. The impact sheared off the ship's bow and sent it tumbling out of control, atmosphere and crew venting into the void. Return fire. Kethvar ordered, but his gunners were finding it impossible to target the human vessels. The 12 ships moved through space with an agility that seemed to violate physics, turning and accelerating in ways that should have liquefied any crew aboard. His energy weapons lanced out brilliant beams of coherent light and focused plasma that could carve through asteroid fields. But the human ships seemed to anticipate every shot, sliding through space like ghosts, their angular hulls reflecting energy blasts at impossible angles. And they kept firing. The kinetic weapons never stopped, a constant stream of metal death that turned proud warships into expanding clouds of debris. Each shot was perfectly calculated, each impact precisely placed to cause maximum damage. "Sir," his tactical officer screamed over the chaos. "The destroyer pack is trying to flank them." Kethvar watched in horror as 20 of his fastest ships attempted to execute a standard pincer movement. The human vessels seemed to pause for a moment, as if considering this development. Then, they split formation for the first time since emerging from hyperspace. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. The human ships moved through his destroyer formation like dancers, their weapons speaking with mechanical precision. Ships that had served with distinction across a dozen campaigns were reduced to scrap metal in seconds. The humans didn't just destroy them, they dissected them, targeting specific systems with surgical accuracy. "All ships, fall back," Kethvar ordered, abandoning any pretense of following first contact protocols. "Emergency jump to hyperspace." But even that proved impossible. Somehow, the human weapons were creating interference patterns that prevented hyperspace window formation. His ships were trapped in normal space with an enemy that fought like nothing in the galactic database. "Sir," Yixta's voice was barely a whisper. "Incoming transmission from the human flagship. Put it through." The voice of Captain Chen filled the bridge, still calm and professional despite the carnage her ships had just inflicted. "Admiral Kethvar, I'm going to give you one chance to save what's left of your fleet. Withdraw immediately and inform your Galactic Council that the Human Colonial Authority claims this system and all others containing human settlements. Any attempt to return will be met with appropriate force." Kethvar looked at his tactical display. In less than 10 minutes, 12 human ships had destroyed or disabled 37 of his vessels. The remainder of his fleet was scattered and demoralized, their crews probably questioning everything they thought they knew about space combat. "Captain Chen," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "surely we can discuss this. The Galactic Council represents 17 species and thousands of worlds. We could offer your people membership, advanced technology, cultural exchange." Admiral Chen's voice cut him off, and now there was something in her tone that made Kethvar's blood run cold. "You have 60 seconds to begin withdrawal, or I will assume you intend to continue hostilities. I should mention that what you've seen so far represents approximately 12% of our fleet's combat capability. We've been holding back out of respect for first contact protocols." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of damaged systems and the quiet sobbing of a wounded communications technician. Kethvar stared at the tactical display, trying to process what he'd just heard. If this demonstration had only been 12%. "All ships, execute emergency withdrawal," he ordered, his voice hollow. "Fall back to minimum safe distance and prepare damage reports." As his battered fleet limped away from the human vessels, Kethvar found himself studying the retreating ships on his display. They had resumed their perfect formation, moving with mechanical precision as if the battle had been nothing more than a minor interruption to their patrol route. "Sir," his science officer spoke up hesitantly. "I've been analyzing the debris from our destroyed ships. The human weapons appear to be simple kinetic projectiles, tungsten or similar heavy metals, but launched at velocities that require enormous amounts of energy. Their targeting systems show computational capabilities that exceed our best AI networks by several orders of magnitude." Kethvar nodded absently. He was beginning to understand that they hadn't encountered just another species seeking to join the galactic community. They had stumbled across something entirely different, a civilization that had approached the fundamental problems of space warfare from completely different angles and had apparently found solutions that rendered conventional tactics obsolete. "Open a channel to Fleet Command," he ordered wearily. "Priority Alpha Alpha." The holographic display showed Supreme Admiral Vorthake again, but this time the Draknari commander's expression showed frank concern. "Admiral Kethvar, we've been monitoring your engagement. What is your status?" 37 ships destroyed or disabled, sir. The remainder of my fleet is intact but Supreme Admiral, we need to evacuate this system immediately. These humans possess capabilities far beyond anything in our tactical databases. Vorthek's scarred features showed skepticism. 12 ships, Admiral. 12 ships defeated the Third Fleet? Sir, with respect, 12 ships annihilated a significant portion of the Third Fleet without suffering so much as a scratched hull plate. Their weapons technology, their maneuvering capabilities, their tactical systems, everything about them suggests a completely different approach to space combat. One that we are not prepared to counter. There was a long pause as Vorthek digested this information. Finally, the Supreme Admiral spoke again. Very well. Maintain your position at maximum sensor range and continue monitoring. I'm dispatching additional forces to your location. Sir, I strongly advise against Admiral Kethvar. Vorthek's voice carried the finality of absolute authority. We have over 2,000 ships in this fleet. Regardless of their capabilities, 12 vessels cannot possibly stand against those odds. The transmission ended, leaving Kethvar staring at the blank display. He had served under Vorthek for years and had never known the Supreme Admiral to make tactical errors. But something told him that conventional thinking would prove inadequate when dealing with humans. Sir, Yixta spoke quietly. Long-range sensors are detecting additional ships emerging from hyperspace. The reinforcements are arriving. Kethvar watched as icons appeared on his tactical displayed battleships, cruiser squadrons, entire destroyer wings. In total, another 800 vessels were taking position around the human ships. Surely, he thought, surely no species could stand against such overwhelming force. The human ships maintained their formation, apparently unconcerned by the massive fleet now surrounding them. Captain Shen's voice came across the communication channels one final time. To all Galactic Council vessels, you have been warned. We claim this system under the authority of the Human Colonial Authority. Withdraw now, or face the consequences. Supreme Admiral Vorthek's response was broadcast across all channels, his voice carrying the authority of millennia of galactic civilization. Human vessels, you are outnumbered more than 100 to 1. Surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. What Captain Chen said next would be recorded in military archives across the galaxy, studied by strategists and historians for generations to come. Admiral, you're not outnumbered. You're just target-rich. And then, the real battle began. Supreme Admiral Vorthek had commanded fleets in 17 major campaigns across 3 galactic quadrants. He had broken siege lines around fortress worlds, led desperate last stands against impossible odds, and orchestrated complex multi-species operations that required split-second timing across hundreds of vessels. But, as he watched his tactical display, he realized that all of his experience meant nothing. The human ships moved. It wasn't the graceful dancing that Admiral Kethvar had described, though that had been terrifying enough. This was something else entirely, a coordinated assault that seemed to violate every law of physics and military doctrine simultaneously. The 12 human vessels accelerated in different directions, not away from the encircling fleet but directly toward it. Their fusion drives flared with energies that registered as miniature supernovas on the sensor displays, pushing them to velocities that should have been impossible for vessels of their size. All ships, focus fire. Vorthek commanded. Concentrate on individual targets. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Over 800 warships opened fire simultaneously, filling space with enough energy to glass entire continents. Plasma beams, particle cannons, graviton torpedoes, and exotic matter disruptors converged on the human vessels from every direction. The humans simply weren't there. Report. Vorthek demanded as his gunners tried to track targets that seemed to phase in and out of existence. Sir, his tactical officer stammered, they're moving in 3 dimensions simultaneously. Not just forward and back, up and down, but they're using vector changes that our predictive algorithms can't calculate. It's as if they're treating space combat as a fluid dynamic instead of a ballistic science. One of the human ships, the sensor display identified it as destroyer class, dropped below the plane of engagement and accelerated directly toward the heavy cruiser Eternal Thunder. The Krillian vessel was one of the most heavily armed ships in the fleet, mounting enough firepower to level cities. Its captain, a veteran of the Cygnus War, brought all weapons to bear on the approaching human ship. None of them hit. The human destroyer moved through the barrage like water flowing around stones. Its hull twisted and rotated in ways that defied understanding, presenting different angles to different weapons while maintaining its devastating approach speed. When it reached optimal range, which was apparently about 3,000 kilometers, far closer than any sane tactician would engage, it fired a single shot. The projectile struck Eternal Thunder's heavily armored bridge section. The kinetic impact didn't just penetrate the armor, it liquefied it, turning meters of advanced composite plating into superheated plasma that erupted through 17 decks of the ship. The cruiser's back broke under the stress, splitting in half as secondary explosions tore through its hull. "Impossible," whispered Vorthek's science officer, a Etherian whose species had been studying physics for longer than most civilizations had existed. "The energy transfer from that impact, it's as if they somehow compressed the momentum of a moon into a projectile the size of my fist." But there was no time for analysis. The other human ships were engaging across the entire battle line, and what Vorthek was seeing defied everything he thought he knew about space warfare. A human cruiser, if the classifications meant anything at all, engaged an entire destroyer squadron simultaneously. Instead of trying to avoid the concentrated fire of 12 ships, it flew directly into the formation. Its weapons spoke with mechanical precision, each shot perfectly timed and targeted. The destroyers didn't just die, they were dissected, their hulls carved apart with surgical accuracy that left their weapon systems intact but everything else reduced to expanding debris clouds. "Sir," his communications officer shouted over the chaos. "The second battle group is reporting, they're gone, sir. All 18 ships. Something hit them from 12,000 kilometers away." Vorthek's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Impossible. What weapon has that kind of range and accuracy?" His answer came in the form of a sensor contact moving through his fleet's formation at speeds that made previous human movements look sluggish. The sensor data was confused, contradictory. It showed a ship roughly the size of a battleship, but moving with the agility of a fighter. "Track that contact," he ordered. "We're trying, sir, but it's accelerating through our formation at 0.75 light speed in normal space. That should be impossible without entering hyperspace." The human battleship, for lack of a better term, ripped through the center of Vorthek's carefully planned encirclement. Its weapons fired continuously, a stream of kinetic projectiles that never missed their targets. Each shot was precisely calculated to cause maximum damage, striking critical systems with mathematical precision. Ships didn't just explode, they came apart like puzzles being disassembled. Hull plates separated along design seams, weapon mountings sheared off cleanly, and entire sections of vessels simply ceased to exist as tungsten rounds traveling at relativistic speeds transferred their kinetic energy into whatever they struck. "All ships, emergency scatter pattern," Vorthek ordered, abandoning formation discipline in favor of simple survival. "Execute random evasion courses." But even that proved futile. The human ship seemed to anticipate every movement, every course change, every desperate attempt at evasion. Their weapons never stopped firing, never missed their targets, never seemed to run out of ammunition despite the impossible rate of fire they were maintaining. "Sir," his tactical officer reported with barely controlled panic, "we've lost 60% of the fleet. The humans have suffered 0 casualties." Vorthek stared at his tactical display, watching centuries of military doctrine being rewritten in real time. Icons representing proud warships, vessels that had served with distinction across dozens of campaigns, winked out of existence with terrifying regularity. "How?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Sir? How are they doing this? 12 ships against 800. It's mathematically impossible." His science officer looked up from her console, her large eyes filled with something approaching terror. "Sir, I've been analyzing their movement patterns and weapon signatures. I think they're not fighting like a military force." "Explain." "They're fighting like a machine, sir. Every movement is perfectly coordinated, every shot is mathematically optimized, every tactical decision is made with computational precision that exceeds our best military AIs." "But it's more than that." She paused, manipulating her console to display a complex holographic projection. "Look at their formation patterns." The display showed the 12 human ships moving through three-dimensional space, their positions and trajectories marked with glowing lines. What Vorthek saw made his blood run cold. "They're not 12 separate ships," he breathed. "No, sir. They're 12 components of a single weapons system. Each vessel is coordinating with the others in real time, sharing sensor data, tactical information, and targeting solutions. When they engage our forces, they're not fighting as individual commanders making independent decisions. They're fighting as a single entity with 12 bodies. The implications were staggering. Galactic military doctrine was based on the fundamental assumption that each ship operated as an independent unit under the overall command of a fleet commander. Coordination was limited by communication delays, individual crew capabilities, and the inherent chaos of combat. But, if the humans had somehow created a system where every ship in their fleet operated as part of a single consciousness. Sir, the communications officer interrupted his thoughts. We're receiving a transmission from the human flagship. Put it through. Captain Chen's voice filled the bridge, still maintaining that terrifying professional calm despite the carnage her forces were inflicting. Supreme Admiral Vorthak, I'm prepared to offer you the same terms I gave Admiral Kethvar. Withdraw immediately, and your remaining ships will be allowed to leave this system unmolested. Vorthak looked at his tactical display. In less than 20 minutes, the humans had reduced his fleet from over 800 ships to fewer than 300. The survivors were scattered across millions of cubic kilometers of space, their formations broken and their crews demoralized. Captain Chen, he said, his voice carefully controlled, what you're asking is impossible. The Galactic Council cannot simply abandon its territorial claims based on the threats of a single species, regardless of their apparent technological advantages. Admiral, Chen replied, and, for the first time there was something other than professional courtesy in her voice. Something that made Vorthak's spine ridges flatten against his back in instinctive fear. This system contains human colonies. There are children down there. Families. People who have built lives on worlds that were uninhabited when we found them. You will not take that from them. Captain, surely we can reach some accommodation. The galaxy is vast enough for all species to coexist. There are billions of uninhabited worlds, Admiral Vorthak. Chen's voice cut through his diplomatic overtures like a blade. You have 30 seconds to begin withdrawing your forces, or I will demonstrate what our ships are actually capable of when we're not holding back. The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of damaged systems. Vorthak found himself staring at the tactical display, trying to process what he'd just heard. If the devastation he'd witnessed was the humans holding back. Sir, his tactical officer whispered, long-range sensors are detecting energy spikes from the human vessels. Whatever they're about to do, it's drawing massive amounts of power. Vorthak watched as the 12 human ships assumed a new formation, a perfect sphere with one vessel at its center. Energy readings spiked beyond anything his sensors had ever recorded, and space itself seemed to bend around the human fleet. All ships, he said quietly, initiate emergency jump to hyperspace. Full retreat. Sir, his communications officer asked uncertainly. You heard me. Full retreat. Send a priority message to the Galactic Council. Tell them. He paused, watching as his proud fleet fled from 12 alien ships. Tell them we've encountered something beyond our current understanding. Something that changes everything. As his flagship prepared to enter hyperspace, Vorthak took one last look at the tactical display. The human ships had resumed their perfect formation, patrolling the system as if the battle had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Sir, his science officer said quietly, I've been analyzing the debris fields from our destroyed ships. The human weapons aren't just kinetic projectiles. They're somehow manipulating the fundamental forces of the universe. Mass, energy, momentum, they're treating physics like a tool rather than a limitation. How is that possible? I don't know, sir. But, I think we need to consider the possibility that we haven't just encountered a technologically advanced species. We may have encountered something that approaches the universe from a completely different perspective than any known civilization. As the Supreme Admiral's flagship entered hyperspace, fleeing a battle that had lasted less than an hour, Vorthak found himself contemplating implications that went far beyond military defeat. If the humans could manipulate physics at a fundamental level, if they could coordinate their forces with machine-like precision, if they could treat space combat as a form of applied mathematics rather than the chaotic art that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia, then, everything the Galactic Council thought it knew about civilization, technology, and the nature of intelligence itself might need to be reconsidered. Meanwhile, in the Tau Ceti system, Captain Chen stood on the bridge of her destroyer, watching as the last of the alien vessels vanished into hyperspace. Around her, her crew worked with quiet efficiency, already beginning post-battle analysis and system checks. Captain, her tactical officer reported, all enemy vessels have cleared the system. No casualties on our side, minimal ammunition expenditure. Understood. Send a report to Colonial Command. Inform them that first contact with the local hegemony went approximately as expected. Ma'am, should we pursue the retreating vessels? Shen considered for a moment, then shook her head. No. Our mission is to protect human space, not to wage unnecessary wars. But continue monitoring long-range sensors. I have a feeling they'll be back with reinforcements. Yes, ma'am. Captain, if I may ask, was that really only 12% of our combat capability? Shen smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Actually, I was being conservative. That was closer to 8%. The tactical officer's eyes widened, but he said nothing more. Outside the ship's viewports, the stars of the Tau Ceti system continued their ancient dance, unchanged by the brief but decisive battle that had just reshaped the balance of power in the galaxy. On the third planet of the system, in the colonial city of New Geneva, children played in parks built on soil that had never known the footstep of any sapient species except humanity. Their parents worked and lived and loved, completely unaware that their peaceful existence had just been defended by firepower that could crack moons and tactical systems that treated the laws of physics as mere suggestions. But, in the halls of power across 100 worlds, in the command centers of species that had considered themselves the masters of galactic civilization, emergency meetings were being called. The impossible had happened. A previously unknown species had appeared from nowhere and demonstrated military capabilities that rendered the existing balance of power obsolete. The age of human expansion into the galaxy had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. Admiral Kethvar sat in his quarters aboard the damaged Stellar Dawn, staring at after-action reports that told a story his mind struggled to accept. 37 ships destroyed. 0 human casualties. Engagement time, 9 minutes and 43 seconds. He had sent a priority message to Galactic Intelligence, requesting any information about this human colonial authority or their technology. The response had been immediate and troubling. No records existed of any species calling themselves human. No database contained references to Earth or to any of the technological approaches the humans had demonstrated. It was as if they had emerged from empty space, fully formed and possessing capabilities that suggested centuries of parallel technological development along completely different lines than galactic civilization had pursued. Sir, his aide entered quietly, carrying a data tablet. The preliminary analysis of the human weapons technology. Kethvar accepted the tablet and scrolled through the technical data. What he read made him feel suddenly very old. The human kinetic weapons weren't just advanced, they represented a completely different approach to the fundamental problems of space combat. Instead of trying to overcome energy shields with more powerful energy weapons, they had apparently decided to ignore energy defenses entirely. Their projectiles moved at speeds that made evasion impossible and carried kinetic energies that made conventional armor meaningless. But it was the tactical coordination that truly disturbed him. The report suggested that the human ships had shared sensor data and tactical information in real time, with response delays measured in microseconds rather than the seconds that limited conventional fleet coordination. It was as if each ship was merely an extension of a single tactical mind. Sir, his aide said quietly, there's something else. Long-range communications intercepted a human transmission during the battle. What kind of transmission? Voice communication between the human vessels. Sir, they weren't speaking in the language they used to communicate with us. They were using some kind of compressed data protocol that packed enormous amounts of information into microsecond bursts. Kethvar looked up from the tablet. Data protocol? Yes, sir. Our linguists think the humans might actually be using direct neural interfaces to control their ships. Not just computer assistance or AI support, but actual brain-to-machine interfaces that allow them to process information and react at superhuman speeds. The implications were staggering. If the humans had somehow merged biological intelligence with machine capabilities, if they could think and react at computer speeds while maintaining the creativity and adaptability of organic minds. Sir, there's one more thing. The tactical analysis suggests that the human ships were operating under significant restraints during the battle. What kind of restraints? They never fired when civilian ships were in their targeting solutions, even when doing so would have been tactically advantageous. They seemed to be following some kind of engagement protocol that prioritized minimizing casualties over tactical efficiency. Kethvar absorbed this information slowly. The humans had destroyed over 500 ships while operating under rules of engagement that prioritized enemy survival. What could they have accomplished if they had simply tried to kill as efficiently as possible? "Prepare another message to Fleet Command," he said finally. "Recommend immediate diplomatic contact with the human colonial authority. Whatever our next move is, it cannot involve military action." As his aide left to carry out the order, Kethvar remained in his quarters, contemplating a galaxy that had suddenly become much more complex. Somewhere out there, humanity was expanding among the stars, carrying with them technologies and capabilities that could reshape civilization itself. The question was whether they would prove to be humanity's salvation or its doom. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called within hours of the fleet's retreat from the Tau Ceti system. In the vast amphitheater on Nexus Prime, representatives from 17 different species gathered in an atmosphere of barely controlled panic. Chancellor Veltar of the Altarian Confederation stood at the central podium, her normally graceful demeanor replaced by visible tension. The holographic displays around the chamber showed tactical recordings from the battle, data streams that told a story of military defeat so complete that many council members struggled to accept its reality. "Fellow representatives," Veltar began, her melodious voice carrying across the chamber, "we face an unprecedented situation. A previously unknown species has demonstrated military capabilities that exceed anything in our collective databases. More troubling, they have claimed sovereignty over systems that contain what they describe as human colonies." Representative Gorth 9 of the Draknari Empire raised a clawed hand. "Chancellor, with respect, we are discussing 12 ships against a fleet of over 800. Surely the reports are exaggerated." The holographic display in the center of the chamber activated, showing the tactical recording from Supreme Admiral Vorthek's flagship. The assembled representatives watched in stunned silence as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. Ships that had served with distinction for decades simply ceased to exist, torn apart by weapons that seemed to treat the laws of physics as mere suggestions. "I assure you," Representative Gorth 9, Veltar said quietly, "these recordings have been verified by multiple independent sources. What you're seeing is completely accurate." The chamber erupted in a babble of voices as representatives struggled to process what they had witnessed. The elegant Zephyrian delegates whispered among themselves in their crystalline language, while the massive Krillian representative's mechanical voice boomed over the chaos. "Order!" Veltar called, her voice enhanced by the chamber's acoustics. "We need to approach this situation with clarity, not panic." Representative Fix Nal of the Etherian Collective rose from her position, her translucent form shimmering with internal bioluminescence. "Chancellor, our scientists have analyzed the tactical data. The human weapons systems appear to violate several fundamental laws of physics as we understand them. Their kinetic projectiles somehow achieve relativistic velocities without the massive energy requirements such speeds should demand. Perhaps more concerning," added Dr. Krell of the Scythian Research Institute, "is their coordination capabilities. Our analysis suggests their 12 ships operated as a single tactical entity, sharing information and making decisions at speeds that exceed our fastest quantum computers." The implications sent a chill through the chamber. Every species in the Galactic Council had developed their military doctrine around certain fundamental assumptions about the limitations of coordination, communication, and physics. If the humans had found ways to transcend those limitations. "What do we know about their territorial claims?" asked Representative Yurth of the Mining Consortium. Chancellor Veltar manipulated the holographic display, showing a three-dimensional map of known space. Red markers appeared throughout the map, scattered across hundreds of light-years but following patterns that suggested careful selection rather than random expansion. "Intelligence reports indicate human colonies in 47 star systems," she said. "All were previously considered uninhabited or unsuitable for known forms of life. They appear to prefer worlds with specific atmospheric and gravitational conditions that most of our species find uncomfortable." 47 systems? Representative Gorth 9's voice carried disbelief. "When did this expansion occur? How did we not detect it?" "That's the disturbing part," Veltar replied. "According to our best estimates, some of these colonies have existed for over 50 standard years. They've been expanding throughout known space without anyone noticing." The silence that followed was profound. The concept that an unknown species had been quietly colonizing space for decades, building settlements and infrastructure completely undetected, challenged fundamental assumptions about galactic surveillance and intelligence gathering. "How?" whispered Representative Fix Nal. We believe they use some form of stealth technology during their expansion phase, explained Dr. Krell. Their ships appear capable of masking their energy signatures to the point where they register as background radiation on most sensor systems. By the time a colony is established and, no longer concerned with concealment, it's too late to prevent it. Representative Yorth leaned forward in his massive chair. And now they're claiming these systems as sovereign territory, backed by military force we cannot match. The situation is more complex than simple territorial expansion, Chancellor Veltar said. We've intercepted additional communications from human space. They appear to have established something called the Human Colonial Authority, which governs their settlements. But, there are references to an entity they call Earth Command, which seems to be a separate military organization. Separate how? Gorth 9 demanded. We're not certain. The communications are heavily encrypted, but our best linguists and codebreakers suggest that the ships we encountered were not operating under Colonial Authority command. They were representing something called the United Earth Navy. The implications were staggering. If the humans had both civilian colonial authority and military forces operating independently, it suggested a level of organizational sophistication that indicated a mature, large-scale civilization rather than a small exploratory force. How large is this civilization? Representative Thix Nal asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Unknown, Veltar admitted. The references we've intercepted suggest multiple Earth-based organizations, colonial authorities covering dozens of systems, and military forces that may be significantly larger than the 12 ships we encountered. The chamber fell silent as the representatives contemplated this information. They were dealing not with a small group of advanced aliens, but potentially with an entire civilization that had developed in parallel with their own, approaching fundamental problems from completely different angles. What are our options? Asked the practical voice of Representative Korth from the Trade Federation. Chancellor Veltar activated another holographic display, showing 3 potential courses of action. Military confrontation, diplomatic engagement, or territorial concession. Military confrontation is obviously impractical, Dr. Krell observed. If 12 ships could defeat our largest fleet, any attempt at military action would be suicidal. Territorial concession is unacceptable, Representative Gorth 9 declared. The Galactic Council cannot simply abandon its expansion policies because a single species demonstrates superior firepower. Which leaves diplomatic engagement, Representative Thix Nal concluded. But, how do we negotiate with a species that communicates through our universal translators but follows completely different technological and social paradigms? Before Chancellor Veltar could respond, an aide hurried to the podium and whispered urgently in her ear. Her expression shifted from concern to something approaching terror. Representatives, she announced, her voice carefully controlled, I just received word from our deep space monitoring stations. Long-range sensors have detected massive energy signatures emerging from hyperspace at the edge of our sensor range. The signatures match those of the human vessels we encountered. How many ships? Representative Gorth 9 asked quietly. The initial count suggests approximately 300 vessels. But, they're maintaining formation at extreme range, apparently content to observe rather than approach. The chamber erupted in chaos. 300 ships. If 12 vessels had destroyed the largest fleet in Council history, what could 300 accomplish? Order! Chancellor Veltar called. We need to remain calm and consider our options carefully. Our options? Representative Yortha's voice boomed over the noise. Chancellor, we have no options. If those ships decide to advance, every world in Council space is defenseless. Not necessarily, Dr. Krell interjected. The humans have demonstrated restraint in their previous engagement. They could have completely annihilated both Admiral Kethvar's and Supreme Admiral Vorthak's fleets, but they chose to allow survivors to retreat. This suggests they follow some form of military ethics or rules of engagement. Or, Representative Gorth 9 said darkly, they want us alive for purposes we cannot fathom. Chancellor Veltar raised her hand for silence. We need to make a decision. Do we attempt diplomatic contact with this human force, or do we wait for them to make the first move? What choice do we have? Representative Thix Nal asked. If we wait, we're simply postponing the inevitable. At least if we initiate contact, we maintain some illusion of control over the situation. The vote was unanimous. Whatever the risks of contact, they were preferable to waiting helplessly for the humans to act. Very well, Chancellor Veltar said. I'll authorize immediate diplomatic contact with the human fleet. May whatever deities we worship have mercy on us all. As the council session ended and representatives hurried back to their homeworlds to prepare for an uncertain future, the implications of humanity's emergence began to ripple across galactic civilization. Emergency meetings were called on 100 worlds. Military commanders reviewed tactical doctrines that might be obsolete. Scientists struggled to understand technologies that seemed to violate fundamental laws of physics. And, in the deep space beyond Nexus Prime, 300 human vessels maintained their silent vigil, their crews monitoring communications and gathering intelligence while waiting for orders from an Earth that most of the galaxy had never heard of. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UEN battleship Indomitable, studying the tactical displays that showed the disposition of the Galactic Council's defensive forces. As commanding officer of the 7th Fleet, she had been tasked with what military historians would later call the most significant first contact mission in human history. Captain, her communications officer reported, were receiving a transmission from the alien fleet. They're requesting diplomatic contact. Put it through to the main display. The holographic projector activated, showing the elegant figure of Chancellor Veltar. Even across the vast differences in biology and culture, it was clear that the alien leader was struggling to maintain composure. To the commanding officer of the human fleet, Veltar began, I am Chancellor Veltar of the Galactic Council. We request the opportunity for diplomatic dialogue to resolve the current misunderstanding between our peoples. Captain Vasquez smiled. After 40 years of careful observation and intelligence gathering, humanity had learned a great deal about galactic civilization. The concept of misunderstanding was particularly amusing, considering that the Council had just lost over 500 warships to a force they outnumbered 70 to 1. Chancellor Veltar, she replied, I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Navy. I have been authorized to engage in preliminary discussions regarding the recognition of human territorial claims and the establishment of formal diplomatic relations between humanity and the Galactic Council. The relief on Veltar's face was visible even across species lines. We welcome the opportunity for dialogue, Captain. Perhaps we might arrange a meeting at a neutral location? I'm afraid that won't be necessary, Chancellor. We've prepared a comprehensive proposal for your consideration. My ships will transmit the complete documentation within the hour. Vasquez gestured to her communications officer, who began uploading a data package that had been prepared by Earth's finest diplomatic and legal minds. The package contained not just humanity's territorial claims, but a complete framework for integrating human space into the broader galactic community while maintaining human independence and security. What the Galactic Council was about to receive was not a surrender or a plea for recognition, but a detailed plan for reshaping galactic civilization to accommodate humanity's presence. It included technological exchanges, trade agreements, cultural protocols, and, most importantly, a complete military alliance structure that would make humanity's defensive capabilities available to Council worlds in exchange for certain guarantees. Captain, Chancellor Veltar said carefully, surely these matters require extensive negotiation and compromise. Chancellor, Vasquez replied with the confidence of someone representing a civilization that had just demonstrated overwhelming military superiority, these are not negotiations. These are the terms under which humanity is willing to join galactic civilization. You have 72 hours to consider our proposal. The transmission ended, leaving the Galactic Council to contemplate a future that would be shaped not by their ancient traditions and established power structures, but by the demands of a species that treated the impossible as merely another engineering problem to be solved. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy would discover that humanity's emergence was not just a military revolution, but the beginning of a new age in galactic civilization. The age of humanity had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The 72-hour deadline had passed in a blur of emergency sessions, heated debates, and desperate analysis. In the end, the Galactic Council had found themselves with no choice but to accept humanity's terms, at least temporarily. The alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. Chancellor Veltar stood once again at the central podium, but this time the atmosphere in the chamber was different. The panic had been replaced by a grim acceptance of reality. The most powerful military force in galactic history had been defeated by 12 ships, and now 300 more waited at the edge of Council space, patient as death itself. The human proposal has been analyzed by our finest legal scholars, military strategists, and diplomatic experts, she announced. The consensus is unanimous, we have no practical alternative but to accept their terms. Representative Gorth9 slammed his fist against his podium, the impact echoing through the chamber. This is surrender. We are capitulating to a species we know nothing about, based on nothing more than a demonstration of force. Representative Gorth9, Chancellor Veltar replied wearily, that demonstration of force rendered the largest fleet in Council history completely ineffective in less than 1 hour. What alternative do you propose? The Draknari representative fell silent, his scarred features showing the strain of accepting what his warrior culture considered unthinkable. The human terms are actually quite reasonable, observed Representative Thix Nal of the Etherian Collective. They're requesting recognition of their territorial claims in systems that were previously uninhabited. In exchange, they're offering technological cooperation, trade agreements, and, most significantly, a mutual defense pact. A mutual defense pact with a species that just demonstrated they could destroy our entire fleet, Representative Yorth noted. That hardly seems mutual. Dr. Krell manipulated his holographic display, showing a detailed analysis of the human proposal. Actually, the defense pact might be the most valuable component of their offer. If the humans are willing to defend Council worlds against external threats, it would solve our most pressing strategic concerns. What external threats? Representative Gorth9 demanded. We are the dominant military force in this sector of the galaxy. Dr. Krell corrected. We were the dominant force. The emergence of humanity changes everything. If there are other species out there with similar capabilities, we need allies, not enemies. Chancellor Veltar activated the main holographic display, showing the current tactical situation. Speaking of which, I have an update from our deep space monitoring stations. The human fleet has moved closer to Council space. They're now positioned approximately 12 light-years from Nexus Prime. The chamber fell silent. 12 light-years was practically next door in galactic terms, close enough that the human fleet could reach any Council world within days. More importantly, Veltar continued, they've been joined by additional vessels. Current count is approximately 800 ships. The number hit the chamber like a physical blow. 800 ships. If 12 vessels could destroy the Council's largest fleet, 800 could probably sterilize entire star systems. Have they made any hostile moves? Representative Thix Nal asked quietly. None whatsoever. They've maintained perfect formation and have responded politely to all communication attempts. But their message is clear, they're waiting for our answer. Representative Yorth manipulated his personal display, reviewing economic projections. Chancellor, I've been analyzing the trade components of their proposal. The technologies they're offering could revolutionize our entire industrial base. Their fusion technology alone could solve our energy crisis for the next millennium. Assuming we can understand it, Dr. Krell added. Our preliminary analysis suggests that human technology operates on principles we haven't discovered yet. Their fusion reactors seem to achieve energy outputs that should be impossible given their size and fuel requirements. Which brings us to another consideration, Chancellor Veltar said. According to their proposal, humanity is prepared to share not just their military technology, but their entire technological database. Medical advances, industrial processes, scientific discoveries, everything. The implications were staggering. The human proposal wasn't just about territorial recognition or military alliance. It was offering to elevate galactic civilization to an entirely new technological level. What do they want in return? Representative Gorth9 asked suspiciously. Recognition of their territorial claims, establishment of trade relations, and, most interestingly, access to our cultural and historical databases, Veltar replied. They want to study us, Representative Thix Nal observed. Apparently. But, in exchange for offering us technology that could transform our civilization, I'd say that's a reasonable request. Before anyone could respond, an aide hurried to the podium and whispered urgently in Chancellor Veltar's ear. Her expression shifted from concern to amazement. Representatives, she announced, I've just received word that a human diplomatic vessel has arrived at Nexus Prime. They're requesting permission to dock at the main orbital station. One ship? Representative Gorth9 asked. One ship. Apparently, they decided not to wait for our formal response. The chamber erupted in confused voices, but Chancellor Veltar raised her hand for silence. The vessel is requesting an immediate audience with the full council. They say they have additional information that will help us make our decision. Additional information? Dr. Krell looked puzzled. What kind of information could they possibly provide that would change our situation? I suppose we're about to find out, Veltar replied. I'm authorizing immediate docking clearance. We'll meet with the human delegation in 1 hour. As the council session recessed, representatives hurried to prepare for what would be the most significant first contact event in galactic history. Meanwhile, in the orbital docking bay above Nexus Prime, a human diplomatic vessel settled into its assigned berth with the quiet efficiency that seemed to characterize everything about their species. The human ship was smaller than the warships that had devastated the council fleets, but it still carried the same angular, aggressive design aesthetic. As the docking tube connected and atmospheric compatibility was confirmed, the first humans ever to set foot on a council world prepared to disembark. Ambassador Sarah Chen, no relation to the destroyer captain who had initiated first contact, reviewed her briefing materials one final time as her small diplomatic team prepared for the meeting. As one of Earth's most experienced xenodiplomats, she had spent decades preparing for this moment, studying galactic civilization and culture through careful observation and intelligence gathering. Now, finally, humanity was ready to announce its presence to the galaxy in an official capacity. Ambassador, her aide reported, the council representatives are assembled and waiting. Understood. Remember, we're not just representing humanity today. We're representing the future of galactic civilization. The human delegation walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime's diplomatic quarter, drawing stares from the various alien species they encountered. To most galactic citizens, humans looked surprisingly similar to several known species: bipedal, bilateral symmetry, obvious sensory organs, but something about their bearing and confidence made it clear they were different. The council chamber had been reconfigured for the diplomatic meeting, with a central meeting area surrounded by the curved seating arrangement that accommodated the various anatomical requirements of the 17-member species. As the human delegation entered, the assembled representatives rose in a gesture of respect that was both diplomatic protocol and practical acknowledgement of the power dynamics involved. Ambassador Chen approached the central podium with the confident stride of someone representing a civilization that had just revolutionized galactic military doctrine. She was tall even by human standards, with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her surroundings. Honored representatives of the Galactic Council, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation system. I am Ambassador Sarah Chen of the United Earth Navy Diplomatic Corps. I come before you today not as a supplicant seeking admission to your community, but as a representative of humanity, offering partnership in building a better future for all sapient species. The distinction was subtle but important. Humanity wasn't asking to join galactic civilization, they were offering to improve it. Ambassador Chen, Chancellor Veltar responded, we welcome you to Nexus Prime. We have been reviewing your government's proposal and find it comprehensive. Thank you, Chancellor. However, I'm here to provide additional context that may influence your deliberations. Ambassador Chen activated a holographic projector that her team had brought, filling the chamber with a three-dimensional star map. What you see here is a complete survey of this galactic sector, conducted over the past 50 years by human exploration vessels. The map showed not just the known star systems that comprised Council space, but hundreds of additional systems that had never appeared on galactic charts. More importantly, it showed other civilizations, species, and empires that the Council had never encountered. As you can see, Chen continued, the galaxy is far more populated than your surveys have indicated. We've identified 17 separate civilizations within 500 light-years of Council space, including 3 that possess technology comparable to our own. The chamber fell silent as the representatives absorbed this information. The galaxy they thought they knew, a relatively peaceful region dominated by the 17 Council species, was actually a small fraction of a much larger, more complex civilization. How long have you known about these other civilizations? Representative Gorth9 asked. We've been conducting systematic exploration and intelligence gathering for nearly a century, Chen replied. Our policy has been to observe and understand before making contact. In several cases, we determined that contact would be inadvisable. She manipulated the holographic display, highlighting 3 particular star systems. These civilizations, for example, follow military doctrines that consider genocide an acceptable strategic option. They expand through complete extermination of existing populations rather than coexistence or assimilation. The implications sent a chill through the chamber. If the Council had continued its expansion policies without knowing about these other civilizations, they might have eventually encountered species far more aggressive than humanity. Why are you telling us this? Chancellor Veltar asked. Because, Ambassador Chen said, humanity believes in the principle of sapient self-determination. We have no interest in conquering or controlling other species. But, we also have no intention of allowing aggressive civilizations to destroy peaceful ones. The Mutual Defense Pact we've proposed isn't just about protecting human space, it's about creating a defensive alliance capable of deterring the kind of species that view other sapients as resources to be harvested. Representative Thix Nal leaned forward in her seat. Are you saying that humanity has been protecting Council space without our knowledge? Not exactly, Chen replied. But, there have been several incidents over the past few decades where aggressive scouts from expansionist civilizations approached Council space. Those scouts encountered technical difficulties and were forced to retreat. The euphemism was clear enough. Humanity had been quietly eliminating threats to Council space for decades, preventing conflicts that the Council never knew were developing. The choice before you is simple, Chen continued. You can accept our proposal for alliance and technological cooperation, or you can continue operating as you have, unaware of the larger galactic community and vulnerable to threats you don't know exist. Either way, humanity will continue to exist and expand. The question is whether we do so as allies or as neighbors who occasionally interact. The diplomatic language was polite, but the underlying message was clear: humanity didn't need the Council's permission for anything. They were offering partnership as a courtesy, not a necessity. Chancellor Veltar exchanged glances with the other representatives, silent communications passing between species that had worked together for centuries. Finally, she spoke for the entire Council. Ambassador Chen, the Galactic Council accepts your proposal for alliance and cooperation. We look forward to learning from humanity and contributing our own knowledge to this partnership. Excellent, Chen replied with a smile. In that case, I can inform you that the first Joint Human Council exploration mission has already been approved by Earth Command. We have several star systems that would benefit from Council expertise in planetary engineering and terraforming. As the formal ceremonies concluded and the details of the alliance began to be worked out, the representatives of the Galactic Council found themselves contemplating a future that was simultaneously more dangerous and more promising than anything they had imagined. Humanity had emerged from the unknown not as conquerors, but as protectors. Their overwhelming military superiority was balanced by a commitment to cooperation and mutual benefit. The technologies they offered could solve problems that had plagued galactic civilization for millennia, while their knowledge of the broader galaxy provided crucial intelligence about threats that no one else had known existed. In the months that followed, human ships would begin appearing throughout Council space not as occupying forces, but as partners in exploration and defense. Human scientists would work alongside Council researchers to solve fundamental problems in physics and engineering. Human diplomats would facilitate new relationships with previously unknown civilizations, expanding the community of peaceful species. The age of humanity and galactic civilization had begun, and, for the first time in centuries, the future seemed brighter than the past. 6 months had passed since the Galactic Council formally recognized the human colonial authority and entered into the Terra Council alliance. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted, and the changes were accelerating with each passing day. Admiral Kethvar stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Joint Research Station orbiting Kepler 442, watching human and Council vessels work together in a complex ballet of construction and coordination. The station was a marvel of hybrid technology, incorporating human engineering principles with Council materials science to create something that neither civilization could have built alone. Remarkable, isn't it? A familiar voice said behind him. Kethvar turned to see Captain Sarah Chen, the destroyer captain who had first encountered his fleet, not the ambassador who shared her name. The human officer had requested a personal meeting, which was unusual enough to pique his curiosity. Captain Chen, he acknowledged. I was beginning to think I'd never see you again after that educational experience at Tau Ceti. Chen smiled, and Kethvar was struck by how different the expression looked from the cold professionalism she had displayed during their first encounter. I wanted to apologize for the circumstances of our meeting. In retrospect, perhaps we could have handled first contact more diplomatically. Perhaps, Kethvar agreed, though privately he suspected that any first contact between their civilizations would have involved a demonstration of force. Though I admit, your methods were effective. They stood in comfortable silence, watching as human construction drones worked alongside Council engineering teams to install the station's primary research laboratories. The collaboration was seamless, despite the vast differences in technology and approach. "Admiral," Shin said eventually, "may I ask what you thought when you first saw our ships?" Kethvar considered the question carefully. "Terror," he admitted. "Pure, overwhelming terror. Not because of your firepower, though that was impressive enough. But because you represented something completely outside our understanding. Your ships moved wrong, fired wrong, coordinated wrong, according to everything we thought we knew about space combat. And, now I understand that we weren't wrong about space combat. We were just limited in our thinking. Your species approaches problems differently than anyone else in the galaxy. Where we see limitations, you see engineering challenges. Where we accept constraints, you find ways around them." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "That's probably the most accurate assessment of humanity I've heard from a council species. We don't like being told that something is impossible." "I've noticed," Kethvar said dryly. "Your fusion reactors shouldn't work. Your kinetic weapons shouldn't be effective. Your coordination systems shouldn't be possible. Yet here we are, and everything functions exactly as you designed it." "That's because we start from different assumptions," Chen explained. "Your science is based on understanding natural laws and working within them. Our science is based on finding the exceptions and exploiting them. Is that why your ships performed so far beyond theoretical limitations?" "Partly. But mostly it's because we never accepted that those limitations were actually limitations. When your scientists said that kinetic weapons were obsolete because energy shields could stop them, we decided to build kinetic weapons that could punch through energy shields. When your engineers said that perfect fleet coordination was impossible because of communication delays, we developed systems that could share information faster than light." Kethvar's four eyes widened. "Faster than light communication? That's theoretically impossible." "According to current galactic physics, yes. According to human physics." Chen shrugged. "We found a loophole." Before Kethvar could respond, his communicator chimed with an urgent message. His expression grew concerned as he read the text. "Problem?" Chen asked. "Possibly. Long-range sensors have detected an unknown fleet entering Council space. Large formation, moving at high speed toward the Vega system." Chen's demeanor changed instantly, the relaxed friendliness replaced by the cold professionalism that had terrified him during their first encounter. "How large?" "Preliminary count suggests over 300 vessels. Configuration unknown, but they're not broadcasting any identification signals." "Admiral," Chen said with deadly quiet, "I need to ask you to evacuate this station immediately." "Captain, surely that's not necessary." "If this is another first contact situation, Admiral," Chen interrupted, and something in her voice made Kethvar's blood run cold, "I've been monitoring long-range communications for the past hour." "That's not a first contact fleet. Those are devourers." The name meant nothing to Kethvar, but Chen was already activating her personal communicator, speaking in rapid human language to someone he couldn't see. The translation matrix struggled with the technical terminology and urgency of her speech. "All Council ships, this is Captain Chen," she announced on the general communication channel. "Initiate immediate evacuation of all non-military personnel. All civilian vessels are to jump to hyperspace and retreat to minimum safe distance. Military vessels are to assume defensive positions but do not engage until given specific authorization." "Captain," Kethvar protested, "you have no authority to issue orders to Council ships." "Admiral," Chen replied, her eyes now showing something that might have been fear, "in approximately 40 minutes, the system is going to become a battlefield unlike anything in galactic history. The Devourers don't take prisoners, they don't negotiate, and they don't leave survivors. If you want your people to live, you'll follow my orders." The urgency in her voice was compelling, but Kethvar had spent 40 years in military service. "Captain, I need more information before I can authorize a general evacuation." Chen's communicator chimed with an incoming message. She listened for a moment, then looked up at Kethvar with an expression that made him step backward involuntarily. "Admiral, I just received confirmation from Earth Command. Operation Cleansing Fire has been authorized. In 30 minutes, this system will be defended by the full combat capability of the human colonial navy." "How many ships?" "All of them. The words hit Kethvar like a physical blow. All of them. Every human warship in existence was apparently converging on this single system to face an enemy he'd never heard of. Admiral, Chen continued, I'm about to show you why humanity spent 50 years preparing for this war. Why we developed weapons that shouldn't work and ships that shouldn't fly and tactics that shouldn't succeed. The Devourers have been expanding across the galaxy for over 1,000 years, exterminating every sapient species they encounter. They consume entire civilizations, strip planets down to bedrock, and leave nothing but empty space behind. She activated her holographic display, showing a map of the galaxy far beyond anything the Council had ever seen. Vast regions of space were marked in red dead zones where stars still shone but no life remained. Humanity discovered them 90 years ago, when they destroyed our first deep space colony, Shin said quietly. We've been preparing for their return ever since. Every ship we built, every weapon we developed, every tactical innovation we created, it was all designed for this moment. The implications were staggering. Humanity's overwhelming military capabilities hadn't been developed for conquest or expansion. They had been preparing for a war against an enemy that threatened all sapient life in the galaxy. Why didn't you tell us? Kethvar asked. Because until now, you weren't ready to help us fight them. Your military doctrine, your technology, your entire approach to warfare, none of it would be effective against the Devourers. We needed to change how you think about combat before we could trust you as allies in this war. As if summoned by her words, the human fleet began arriving. But this wasn't the small task force that had devastated the Council's largest fleet, or even the diplomatic flotilla that had established the alliance. This was something that transcended anything Kethvar had imagined possible. Ships materialized from hyperspace in perfect formation, filling space around the research station with such density that the local gravitational field began to fluctuate. Thousands of vessels, destroyers, cruisers, battleships, and massive capital ships that dwarfed anything in the galactic database. How many? Kethvar whispered. 12,417 combat vessels, Chen replied matter-of-factly. Plus support ships, logistics vessels, and mobile construction platforms. The entire human colonial navy is now present in this system. The scale was beyond comprehension. 12,000 warships, each one capable of matching or exceeding the combat effectiveness of an entire Council fleet. It represented a military force capable of conquering